All right. Well, today I'm here with Bruce Pardy, and I'm so happy to be able to have this conversation with you. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me.
Oh, thank you, Leslie. Thanks for the invitation. Pleasure.
Wonderful. And for anybody who's not familiar with your work, would you mind just giving an introduction for yourself?
Sure. Yes, I'm the executive director of Rights Probe, which is I suppose I would call it a law and liberty think tank, a division of the Energy Probe Research Foundation based in Toronto. And I'm a law professor at Queen's University, have been for many, many years. And I've been working in the area of what the hell is going on. And it's a big question how we got to the place that we're at now in so many different ways. And there are lots of causes I think we can point to. Some of them probably more important than others, but it's a really difficult thing to get one's head around, and that's more or less what I've been spending my time doing.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to talk with you about. And I'm one of the things that I really like about what I've seen of your work is that you're drawing the connections between the critical theory and the COVID overreach. And it seems like, in my experience, there's almost two camps. These are almost two separate issues for a lot of people. Some people are seeing the the CRT and the gender ideology as one thing, and they're concerned about that, but they're totally not questioning anything when it comes to COVID. And then vice versa. You've got the people who are not, it's not on their radar what's happening in schools and with critical theory, but they're very concerned about COVID mandates. And I have seen this as part of the same form. This is all coming in together, and it's all this nonsensical, what the heck is going on with our culture. And I like how you're able to speak to this, and I'm really interested in your thoughts on that and why people are not able to see that big picture.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. All these things, and the two things you've mentioned in particular,
Mhm.
COVID and the transgender stuff, for me are part and parcel of the same phenomenon. And I think you're absolutely right that a lot of people don't see it that way, at least at first. I've met a lot of people who come around to that view that actually, okay, maybe they are, but they didn't see it that way at the beginning, and there's still lots of people who don't who have resistance to that view. But perhaps I'll start with these with what I call the four doctrines of the apocalypse and critical theory that you mentioned, and in a way, a lot of this can be laid at the feet of the universities. Um, there's an old joke, sometimes attributed to Henry Kissinger, although that's somewhat in question. But the joke goes, university politics are so vicious precisely because there's so little at stake.
Mm.
Now, that's only a little funny if it's true. It turns out that it's not true at all.
Mhm.
What happened in the ivory tower, most people thought over time that, what, just a bunch of, intellectual eggheads, and leave them to
Mhm.
their thing. And, they won't do any harm. Just leave them cloistered in their buildings. But the crazy ideas escaped.
Mhm.
And one of those crazy ideas is critical theory. Critical theory is essentially an academic doctrine, although not even a doctrine now, more like an agenda or a program. But the doctrine, the critical theory doctrine, was essentially a neo-Marxist theory that had its origins in Germany between the two world wars. And a bunch of scholars got together essentially to investigate why Marxism wasn't catching on in the West. And from those beginnings, it traversed the Atlantic and ended up in the States and on the continent as well, and made its way through basically all the disciplines, starting with sociology and linguistics and those kinds of disciplines, and to the professional schools like teachers' colleges and law schools now, and in the present day, um, its final conquest basically is underway in the sciences, engineering, medical schools, and so on.
Mhm.
And it's a neo-Marxist theory. Now, the critical theorists wouldn't probably many of them wouldn't like that characterization, but it's neo-Marxist in the sense that it's anti-Western. It's
Mhm.
an anti-Western doctrine or program that basically says that Western civilization is wrong. It's evil, and it needs to be undermined. The institutions need to be infiltrated, and we need to overcome the ideas upon which Western civilization are based. And those ideas, of course, many of them come from the Enlightenment, reason, observation, self-direction, debate, free speech, open inquiry, and even reason itself. Those things, and people who are Western have difficulty understanding how you can reject those things because their brains are built on them. Now, how can you reject reason? Mm-hmm. Because that's the way you think. But nevertheless, that is the agenda. It's an anti-Western doctrine, and it's critical theory itself. It's the label. Now, I should say this for your listeners: critical theory is not to be confused with critical thinking. Mm-hmm. People often make that connection because they both have the word critical in them. But critical theory is not critical thinking. In fact, if you critically think about critical theory, you are breaking the rules. The rules are you go along with the premises. Mm-hmm. And the premises are that Western civilization is wrong and evil and based upon power relationships. There's nothing in civilization, nothing in society other than power relationships. And the way in which critical theory and its offshoots and the four doctrines, critical theory, postmodernism, critical race theory, and social justice. And there are others, but those are the main ones, I think.
So will you say those four again?
Yes. Critical theory.
Okay.
Postmodernism, mm-hmm. which is not exactly a direct offshoot of critical theory. It's related, and they lean on each other, but it's not directly, the lineage is not direct. But critical theory, postmodernism, critical race theory, which emerged in the American Legal Academy in the late 20th century, and social justice, which I'm sure most people are familiar with. And they're all variations on each other and very closely related. But because
I've been summing this all up as critical social justice theory, but you're saying that these are all
not inappropriate.
Okay,
that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and so critical theory is this umbrella, this sort of scholarly umbrella under which an awful lot of this is found. And to tell a straight story, I mean, this is not all coherent. If you look at all the literature on this stuff, it goes all over the place, and it's self-contradictory, and the scholars disagree, and it's hard to make sense of, and it's verbose and incomprehensible sometimes. So it's not neat. It's not easily encapsulated, and whatever you say is going to be contradicted by somebody who's in the field who knows better than that. And to be truthful, there's an awful lot. I mean, it's voluminous, and it tends to be incoherent and sometimes impenetrable. So it's very difficult to distill into a very sort of small or distinctly stated conclusion. But nevertheless, it does, and it's at least in its modern incarnation, stand for these propositions that are having sort of civilizational effects. Mm-hmm. So you sort of have to go along with the idea that we're summarizing it and making it probably simpler than it really is, but it's also elusive. I mean, I've described it as one of those things that, when it's like trying to staple jelly to a wall. It just won't stay still long enough to actually allow its practitioners to identify what it actually is. But nevertheless, it has these features, and it is having this role on our culture. And I think it's fair to call it out for that.
Mm-hmm. And do you see, I guess there's so many questions that I have for you based on just what you said there. One of the things, I guess, an offshoot I'm curious about the idea of postmodernism. And so with postmodernism, I feel like it's kind of the water that we're swimming in a way, and it's sort of hard to undergird a lot of our defenses of Western culture, with considering that we have this sort of postmodern thinking where everything's relative. So how do you defend certain things without, where do you get a solid footing if you're not using religion or tradition as a reason in and of itself for why things are good?
Good question. Great question. That's a question I think that is the question that lies between the conservatives and the classical liberals.
Mm.
Postmodernism is basically this proposition that there is no such thing as objective truth. Truth is relative. Truth is socially contingent, and I think there's some validity to that, because if you get right down to nitty gritty, even the scientific method, you drop a hammer and it falls to the earth, and you see it drop, and so it dropped, and that's objective truth. Except that there's no way to prove that what you perceived through your sense of sight is actually real. So in a literal sense, it's not possible to prove that your senses are a window onto the real world without using your senses to prove it. And therefore it's circular, and therefore you can't do it. Right. So, and I don't have any doubt that the hammer fell to the earth, but nevertheless, it's a bit of a difficult proposition to insist that there is objective truth if you can't prove what it is. And so the irony for postmodernism, for my money, is this: the postmodernists who insist that truth is relative, they ought to be libertarians, because the logical conclusion of that theory is, well, if everything is relative, then everybody has to decide for themselves. But they're not libertarians. Instead, they're over here with the critical theorists and the progressives, insisting, and here's the catch. After insisting that truth is relative, then the social justice warriors and the critical theorists, after embracing that postmodernist idea, then say, oh, and by the way, you will use my pronouns because I am a woman. As though they've just forgotten that you just said that truth is relative and everybody can make it up for themselves.
Yeah, so
it's an inconsistency as opposed to a problem with the initial theory.
Absolutely. And I've seen that as well. It's like we're going to break down what it means to be male or female, but then we're going to insist that there's some definite category that's based on some other kind of truth, and you have to adhere to that.
It is strewn with inconsistencies and incoherence. But here's one of the other things about critical theory: it rejects Enlightenment values, including data, evidence, and reason itself. So here's the catch. So if you come along and you object to their theory on the basis that, number one, it doesn't make sense, and number two, the data doesn't support it, instead of undermining the theory, you are confirming yourself as one of those evil Western people with privilege. So you cannot combat the premise using evidence and reason. That is a demonstration of the fact that you are not following the premise, and therefore you are an outlier. Therefore you are bad. Then you are wrong. And so it's brilliant. It's brilliant. It eliminates the objectors by definition. And so instead of arguing about any particular policy, you have to argue about the premises and undermine it at its foundation. Otherwise, it wins by definition.
Well, and it seems like it's very slippery. And
very slippery.
Like you say, that it rejects reason, it rejects data, and anybody who criticizes it is called out for as being part of this other. It's like a false teaming sort of thing. But and so this is interesting. I don't know politically, the categories don't make much sense to me anymore. I'm not able to make sense of what does it even mean to be a liberal or conservative at this point, or centrist or anything. I've been calling myself a centrist, but in the last week, I've been criticized as being a leftist apologist and a right-wing clickbait site, so I get it from both sides. I'm not enough of this or too much of that.
That's because there aren't two sides. For my money, there are three. There are three sides. Okay. And the three sides are, so let me back up for a stage. One of the problems is this word liberal, because it has come to mean two opposite things. The original meaning of liberal was somebody who believed in liberty. So the liberal was the libertarian, as we might now describe them. That's why we use the word, the label classical liberal, as an original liberal,
right,
as in the original meaning of the word. The other meaning of liberal is leftist, progressive, woke, right? And that's a completely different thing.
And I won't use the word liberal for that. I will call them leftists, because I don't see that as being liberal at all.
I agreed. Me too. Me too. I want the word back.
Yeah, me too.
Right. So the three camps are the actual liberals, the classical original liberals,
Mm-hmm.
the progressive woke social justice folks,
Mm-hmm.
and the conservatives.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a teaming up of the conservatives and the real liberals because they have a common opponent in the
Mm-hmm.
woke progressives.
Mm-hmm.
But the liberals and conservatives don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. The conservatives tend to believe in absolute truth,
Mm-hmm.
in absolute moral truth. I mean, they think they know what is best because that best is based upon virtue and tradition and religion and all assortment of things that they think they understand through generations of learning.
Mm-hmm.
The classical liberals or libertarians would be inclined to agree with the postmodernists in the sense that, well, even if there is a moral truth, you can't prove to me what it is, and I can't prove it to you. So you have to leave me alone and let me decide for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The real liberal mantra is, don't tell me what to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? And so the real liberals are the individualists.
Mm-hmm.
They're the real liberty people. The conservatives, although at the moment they're liberty people because they're trying to fight against the tyranny of the woke progressives, they want their own order.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they were in power once upon a time, they were the ones that enforced a conservative vision of society.
Mm-hmm.
And so the woke progressives don't trust them, and neither, frankly, do the real liberals, because if the conservatives were in power, they think, well, we just get more but different rules from you than what we have right now. But in the meantime, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so the liberals and the conservatives are working together to try and overcome the tyranny of the woke. But so I think of it in three. The liberals, the real liberals, the classical liberals are the individualists,
Mm-hmm.
and the woke progressives and the conservatives
Mm-hmm.
are both, in their own different ways, collectivists.
Okay. Interesting. That's really interesting. So when you talk about, and then that's helpful. That's really helpful to hear the categories described that way. When you talk about the critical theories infecting the universities, and I'm not sure if this made it in because I'm not sure if this was before the cut or not.
Right.
You were talking about how for a while it was the just the academics doing their own stuffy little dance, and people were kind of leaving them alone and letting them do their thing, and thinking it can't harm anything. It's just it's in this bubble, but now it's gotten out. It's really infected everything. It seems like it's infected everything all the way down the educational line. Like we've got this stuff in our elementary schools, in our preschools, even in some cases.
Yep.
And I guess it's stunning to me that people can accept this way of thinking. That like I've described this before. I don't know if I don't want to belabor this or make points that I've already made that might bore people, but I'm interested in your take on it. When I was in undergrad, I went to undergrad in the early 2000s, graduated in 2008, and then went to law school. And then I took a break of about almost a decade before I went back to graduate school. And when I got to graduate school, it was like a completely different world. It just seemed like I went to a clinical psychology. My undergrad, I got to take some master's classes in clinical psychology. Then I'm in a clinical applied psychology program. And it's like a different landscape altogether. Like the things that we learned back in the early 2000s versus the things that are being taught now, it's directly contradictory. How can these same people teaching this stuff, how can they be informed by this older way of thinking and hear themselves say the things that they're saying now? What has happened? Do you have thoughts on that? What's going on?
Yeah, so it depends upon the person, right? So they're not all true believers.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them are. Many faculty and universities are true believers in the mindset, in the premise, in the agenda, in the critical theory doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
Many are not, but people respond to their incentives.
Mm-hmm.
And there are not very many people in the universities today who would openly argue against, object to, push back on these ideas, because it's for many people it'll be career suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how many people are actually just playing along? It's hard to say. But there are certainly a lot who actually do believe it, and it makes sense that they would, because especially for a younger generation of scholars, that's how they got to where they are, and it's what they were taught themselves, and it is their view of the world, and it's partly why all our institutions have become infected with it, because the universities graduated generations of students who've been taught this and think that it must be true, and now populate governments and media and school boards and schools, teacher colleges, and so on, corporate HR departments, and so on, all down the line. I mean, these are the people now who run society, and it's a bit like a cult. I mean, you can't just have a conversation with them and say, well, yeah, but these things are wrong, because they have nothing else. That's what their brains are made of now. It's like the furniture in the room. And if you just clear out the furniture, there's nothing else there. And these people have been educated to do this job. And so if you take the job away, or if you undermine the proposition, it's like, well, what else are they going to do? And there are so many of them now that it's not surprising that the whole culture is traveling down this road. So we were all sleeping while the universities did this. And as you say, it's now it's not just university age students. It starts at the very beginning. And that's one of the most important things that any revolution tries to do, right? It tries to take the kids, so that when the kids come of age, they are totally convinced of the new way of thinking. The new way of thinking, the revolutionary way of thinking. The revolution is complete when the new way of thinking is simply the way people think. And that is the case with an awful lot of people now.
And so when you say that, it makes me think that the way that I think is so Western, and so I guess it's the Western liberalism, Western enlightenment. I can't see if something is anti-Western, I can't see what it is pro. What is it for? What is the ultimate truth in this whole ideology? Because it seems like maybe it's just because of my own bias and my own deeply embedded values, but it seems anti-life to me.
Oh, it is anti-life. Yeah. And this is a very difficult thing to get one's head around. And there are lots of different ways to approach the question you've just asked. I think it's a very important question, but here's one of the ways. So, this is linked to, not exactly the same thing, but linked to this emergence of transhumanism thinking. Yes. And transhumanism, on the one hand, is thought to be this, the drive to meld human and technology, sort of a futuristic, pro-technology, progressive, let's get on with the show attitude. But it's also rooted in what some call, and I think I agree with them, what some would call a profound lack of faith or lack of meaning in the material world. It's a view of the world as purely material, and an awful, awful place without a God, or if there is a God, then with an evil God. In other words, there is no faith there that the universe is unfolding as it should, and therefore human beings must take it upon themselves to wipe out what exists and create their own paradise if we can. But it's a very dark kind of philosophy. It is anti-life in the sense of being against the kind of lives that we live now. It's a condemnation of the present state of affairs and the lack of any kind of faith in the workings of nature or evolution or God or anything else. It's a reflection of a lack of meaning, and so very self-destructive in that sense.
And that's what you see underlying this.
in good part. So there's transhumanism, there's this critical theory stuff. I lay some of the blame at early feminism because of the contradictory positions that it took.
Early feminism, interesting.
Not very early feminism. Sorry,
Okay.
not first wave feminism.
Okay.
Not the proposition that women like men should be entitled to the same rights and freedoms as everybody else. I mean, that's a classical liberal notion. I would completely endorse that. But if you travel along not too far after that, even starting with maybe second wave feminism.
Okay.
But I mean, that's open to argument. I'm not a scholar in these areas, but when we start with the proposition that women are simultaneously equal and special, that combination is deadly. That's the combination that's now being played against them with the transgender agenda. And so in a way, you reap what you sow.
Right.
You either got to choose between we're equal or we're special.
Right.
Because those two things don't go together. And then one of the other major causes of this, I would call, is the growth of the administrative state, which is a purely legal governance thing. But these things all coming together at the same civilizational moment and reinforcing each other. They're consistent with each other, and it's creating a real hurricane of trouble.
Yeah, I think, I hear there's a lot of cultural rumblings around feminism right now. A lot of people are really upset about how the feminists have created this monster.
Right.
And I think it's really interesting to me. I've never followed the waves of feminism. I've never really considered myself a feminist or not a feminist. I start from the same basic premise that you just raised, which is that I think we should all be seen as of equal value and have, a right to have our opinions heard and have our choices the same, men and women. But as far as this idea that we're all the same and have the same capacities, I think that's just it's sort of this attempt to equalize. It feels very collectivist. It feels I think individuals are just very different. It's going to be different. There's a lot of variation within groups and between groups.
Absolutely. No question. Well, so let's just talk about equality for a minute, because there are two different and opposing notions of equality that get confused, and they're very different. So the first is the one that you were just reflecting, which is everybody is equal under the law, entitled to equal treatment, entitled to the same rights and freedoms, but simultaneously are different from each other. I mean, everybody is different. The sexes are different, but even individuals who are the same sex are different. They're different in capacity, they're different in intelligence, they're different in background. Everybody is different. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be treated equally by the law. Okay. That's the first notion. The second notion is everybody is equal in the sense that they are entitled to the same outcome as everybody else. Those two things are incompatible. If the law treats you equally as everybody else and everybody is different, that means that everybody's going to end up in a different place because they're different. If you insist that they end up in the same place, then that means the law cannot treat them the same. They must be treated differently to end up the same. Right?
And that's the concept of equity that's been embraced so broadly right now. We have that in this DEI. It's the central character in this new regime. So. And
right. But let's go back to feminism, because equity is one of the products of that feminist theory. You start originally with feminism with equality, the first notion that we talked about, but then it morphs into equity. Well, women are disadvantaged. Pick your way. And therefore, we have to have special rules for women to bring them up to the level of accomplishment, or as you like, as men. Okay, so now we've morphed from equal treatment to equity. And that's the beginning of the end.
Affirmative action.
Affirmative action is the we don't call it in Canada affirmative action anymore. We call it things like employment equity. But it's the same thing. It is It is treating people differently on the basis of their group identity.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the core notions of trouble that results in all of this. So yeah, not just feminism, but feminism included. So the other day I ran across, just scrolling through Twitter as you do, and there was a clip of a woman throwing the first pitch at a Major League Baseball game.
Okay.
And I took from the description that she was being honored for being the first woman to play NCAA baseball in the men's league.
Oh.
Right. And I thought, well, where are all the feminist protesters?
Huh.
Because the feminist protesters are all protesting men swimming in the women's race in the pool.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, it doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
But hold on. It's okay. It's not okay for the man to be in the women's race in the pool, but it's okay for the women to be playing men's NCAA baseball. And I thought, yep, there you go. That's the contradiction. The feminists, or at least a portion of them, believe that women should have the right to play in the men's league,
mm-hmm.
but men should not have the right to be in the women's pool. Okay. Well, you get what you ask for. That is incoherent. So make your choice. Either we're segregated because we're different as a group, as groups,
mm-hmm. or
it's open season, and everybody should be able to compete for any spot anywhere. And a group of feminists still say, no, equal but special. We can have women's only gym clubs. But we cannot have men's only gym clubs. That's discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, for goodness sakes, pick one. Pick one.
I don't disagree with you, but just for argument's sake,
yep.
Could it be that because men are so physically dominant that if you get a male athlete in a group of female athletes, the male athlete is going to dominate, and it's just going to create a situation where he's going to win most of the time. And so that's unfair, right, versus women being capable enough physically to actually compete on the professional level with men. That woman would be such an outlier and such a special individual to be able to compete at that level, that it doesn't pose the same threat to that men's team that the man joining the women's team does. So could it be, right, that this would be an inclusion on the basis of something different than just, let's blur the lines? And
part of the danger is to think in terms of groups, mm-hmm, instead of individuals.
Okay.
So let's try that at the level of a high school.
Okay.
Right. So there's a men's team and a boys team and a girls team and, mm-hmm, something. Let's say soccer.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the proposition you've just suggested is, well, the boys are too big and strong to play on the girls team.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's a girl that is skilled enough to play on the boys team, then she should be allowed. Okay. So you have segregation, but not.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what you end up with. If these are teams of 15 people, you now have 16 places for girls and 14 places for boys.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a boy displaced from the boys team by this girl, why can't that boy try out for the girls team? Well, because he's a boy, because he's bigger and stronger. Well, hold, mm-hmm, on, but he just got knocked off the boys team by a, mm-hmm, girl.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't make sense. Either categorically, mm-hmm, men are bigger and stronger and more athletic than girls,
mm-hmm,
or there's variation between individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's variation between individuals, well, then we shouldn't be segregated.
Mm-hmm.
So my objection is not either one. I mean, I'm okay with segregation, and I'm okay with open season. Mm-hmm. I'm okay with having two teams that are open for tryouts for anybody, or I'm okay with a boys and a girls team.
Mm-hmm. What
I'm not okay with is an open team and a girls team.
That makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it seems like right now with the transgender issue in athletics, we have kind of an open team and a boys team. generally speaking.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
But in order for that objection to hold, we have to be very clear that it's actually we can't have women playing NCAA men's baseball.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see the feminists object to the inclusion of women on men's teams and in men's spaces
Mm-hmm.
before I believe in their objections to having men in the women's pool.
You'd like them to use their argument consistently.
I would.
And on principle.
Yes.
And that comes back to the idea that within the critical theories, the arguments don't have any consistency. There's no coherency. They directly reject reason. So there's no rationality. And I hear people that I work with and talk with that are afraid of, they want to give lip service to enough of the leftist progressive agenda to not be rejected by it while criticizing it. So they want very badly, oftentimes, to people who are frustrated by critical theory in their own world, maybe at work or whatever this is. They want to be able to criticize it while staying close enough to it that they don't get rejected by it. So they don't want to be called a bigot or a white supremacist or a transphobe or whatever it is.
Yeah.
They just want to raise their criticism.
Right.
And I keep coming back to, there's no criticism that you can raise that won't get you labeled those things, because any criticism automatically puts you all the way in the other camp. And you just have to get used to the fact that those labels are pretty meaningless now.
Yep.
They have been watered down to the point of, it's caricature. It doesn't mean what it used to mean. But I still see a lot of people very much wanting to avoid getting canceled, basically the cancel thing. So what are your thoughts on that? And what do you say to people in that situation?
If you haven't been called a racist or a transphobe or the like yet, then you've been hiding your light under a bushel, probably. Or you've been compromised. Mm-hmm. There really isn't a way to object to this agenda without challenging its premises. And challenging its premises means that in their eyes, you're going to be one of those awful things. They've set it up so that that's what you are. You mm-hmm. can't get away with doing with walking this fine line. Mm-hmm. They won't let you do it. It's made so you can't do it. Mm-hmm. So you really have to out yourself or stay hidden. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't recommend trying to do the balance. It's a polarized world, and mm-hmm. polarized on purpose. Mm-hmm. If you are one of those people who are inclined still to believe in Western values, well, then you've missed the point of the program. Mm-hmm. And there are an awful lot of people, I would say, I don't know if it's most people, but there's a very large proportion of people in the population who are in the situation you're describing. Mm-hmm. Even people who are inside these institutions that are compromised and corrupted, but they don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. because the people who are powerful are enforcing the agenda. Mm-hmm. And so I don't have an easy answer for that. I do, though, think that it's important to make a conscious choice. In other words, you have to be strategic. And one of the first strategic decisions to make is whether or not you're going to be out or hidden. Mm-hmm. You're going to be out of the closet and be one of those people who is willing to be identified as not on board. Mm-hmm. Or do you want to work on the inside? Do you want to pretend to be one of them and do what you can in as a subversive?
Is there any value in doing that at this point? It seems to me that it's time and I can't make a decision for any one individual, because people have to make their own choices and they have their own circumstances, and the costs and the risks could be different for different people. And I agree that you need to be strategic in your own life, but it does seem to me that we're at a really critical point when it's gotten into our children's schools to the degree that it's gotten, where those of us who see this as a danger, it's incumbent upon us to stand up in mass and say no, or else it's too late. I mean,
well,
what do you think?
Well,
I know that's a big question. Sorry.
I think if you could persuade everybody to do that, then yes.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think you are, because people are still responding to their incentives, and they're trying to protect their kids. They're trying to preserve their position, in the social hierarchy for their careers. I mean, a lot of powerful people. So let's back up a step. It seems to be that the people who are pushing the woke agenda the hardest are, if I may use this term, strange white people.
Strange
White people, straight white people.
Okay.
Who are doing so to protect their place. They are going with the agenda to protect themselves. And those people are the most dangerous. The most dangerous people are the people in authority who have not been touched, and they've been able to be not touched by mouthing and enforcing these ideas. And the question is whether or not you can rally the masses to say no. And I'm not sure that you can. And I'm not sure that it would make a difference anyway, because the powerful control society. Now, maybe, but here's another way of looking at it. This philosophy has a negative polarity, in the sense that it's almost designed to produce objection so that the objectors can be attacked. That's actually what they want you to do, so they can demonstrate your racism or your transphobia, or as the case may be.
It's about conflict.
It's about conflict. It is about that. Conflict is what they're about. And it works as long as the conflict is between them, the adherents to the theory, and the Western bigots. As long as they have an enemy, then the thing holds together. It starts to break apart when the enemy is within. And one of the very best things to have seen in the past little while is the fight between the feminists and the transgender activists. That is terrific, because those are people who are inside the camp. Or another example, the Muslim parents protesting the transgender curriculum at their schools. That is terrific. That's what you want, because that confuses them. Like, well, hold on, wait, but we're for you, and we're for you too. But don't fight, without recognizing, or perhaps not wanting to acknowledge, that those agendas for those two different groups are in fact in complete polar opposition. So one of the possible strategies here is for the straight white Christian objectors just to disappear and let them fight inside and let the thing implode. I don't know if that's practical either.
That's really interesting.
And nobody can arrange this. Nobody has control of it. So it has to be organic. And so it's not going to happen that way. But it's at least a strategic proposition.
It's like martial arts, like using its own force against itself.
I call it, you're exactly right. I put it this way. I say, don't box, do judo. Don't trade blow for blow. Use their strength against themselves.
That's really interesting. So it's sort of like they'll cannibalize themselves given enough time.
Well, you know that the thing will collapse eventually because it doesn't make sense. You can't carry on. But the question is, how soon will that be? And it might be a very long time.
So then the people who are sitting around, or I guess sitting around isn't the right word, but sitting in it and not sure if they should speak up or protest it in their own way, whatever that looks like, or if they should wait it out. Maybe there is some wisdom to the waiting it out.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't decide because the protesting, sometimes does appear to be having an effect.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think
But
that through having
yeah,
conversations about these things, it lessens the sting of the labeling and the being camped with, put into the other camp. You see people talking about these issues and talking about it reasonably,
right.
not being
Well, but
reactionary, but being
there's no real way
reasonable.
to talk about this reasonably though.
No?
So there's no compromise in this.
Well, I mean reasonably in terms of like the conversation that we're having right now, where we're talking about this, but we're not having a reaction to it necessarily. We're having a discussion about it, and so that's it.
Well,
It
I
seems to
believe
me
in yeah.
being able to criticize it without fear of they're going to call me a white supremacist and I'm going to be labeled over here.
Oh,
Just
but
being
that's
able
going to
to
happen.
openly
That's going
talk.
to happen. That's
They've
going to
already
happen.
called me that. I don't
Oh,
care
well,
anymore. So
listen, take it as a compliment.
yeah,
Um,
when
I,
it happened to me, I was because I put out an 8-minute video criticizing this counseling program for
right,
doing these things, and
right,
their response was to
sure,
issue a bulletin to the entire student body except for me,
sure.
calling me a white supremacist. And I thought at the time it was just like, well, you've wrapped up my argument with a bow because you've just demonstrated that
That's right.
reasonable objections to this are met with slander. So
Exactly right. Exactly right.
mhm.
But that's why there's no coming into the middle. There's no compromise
Yeah,
in the middle,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I don't mean that you can't have civil conversations with people
Hmm.
about it and
Hmm.
try each of you to try to persuade the other. Of course. I
Hmm.
mean, we don't want violence. We want conversation. We
Hmm.
want we want dialogue. But in terms of the positions of
Hmm.
the camps,
Hmm.
there's no middle ground.
Hmm.
You like going back to the equality idea. You can't have both equity and equal treatment.
Yeah.
Those two things are contradictory. You got to pick one. And
Hmm.
if you're insisting upon equity, then you are against equal treatment under the law.
Hmm.
And that is not a thing
Right.
that we can compromise on.
Right. Yeah, they're mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
So coming back to, when we first began this conversation, and I said that so many people don't seem to see COVID measures in the same way that they see the critical theory stuff. I I definitely have seen the same level of inconsistency there. And one of the things that really surprised me when we were going through the COVID thing and we started with the lockdowns, the masks, and all this stuff,
Mm.
we have. I live in Washington State, and our governor seemed like a pretty. To me, I didn't think much of him. I didn't think either way about him. He always seemed pretty reasonable to me when I had voted for him before, Democrat, left wing, and I'd not really questioned his policies until I saw the guy standing there saying things that I'm like, you're a smart man and you must know that the things that you're saying make zero sense. Why
Right.
are you saying these things? And I thought at first I was just stunned to see an intelligent person making arguments that just they were so full of holes, like
Right.
the support for the masks, the support for this vaccine thing. Anyway, I was completely shocked, and I thought he must be committing career suicide. There's going to be a reckoning on the other end of this, right?
Yeah.
But then this just happened everywhere. It happened all over the place. So one thing I wondered is what incentivizes these people to do this? What are they afraid? Is there some kind of behind the scenes they got threatened? If you don't support these measures, you're out on your ear. We're gonna, or is there some? Are they making a lot of money off of it? What in the world could incentivize someone whose entire reputation is built around seeming like a very reasonable and sane person to stand up and spout such insanity that any intelligent person can see right through? Or am I just way off with my thinking on this?
Well, but it might actually be the reverse
Okay.
in the sense that what he did protected his career. if he'd come out and said things that were sensible, like challenging the mask mandates, that he would have been deposed. Because a lot of the people who are powerful inside the institutions are the people that we're talking about. And this is one of the things about those of us who just want to live and be left alone. We don't want to interfere with other people. All the people who tend to be inside the institutions in roles where they're making rules for people, those are the people who want to be doing that. They're the busybodies. And the busybodies want to be busybodies, and they want their officials to be busybodies. And if you get a person at the top who says, well, no, you let people alone, we're not doing this, then they're suddenly going to be in a lot of trouble from all of the individuals below them who think, this is crazy. We have to do this. We have to save these people. We have to make people do this. We don't put people at risk, even if it's not true. Even if the risk is a phantom, or even if the measures don't work. See, one of the biggest errors that I think that people like you and me made during COVID was to argue that the measures weren't effective. By the way, the masks don't work. By the way, the vaccines carry more risk than benefit for most people. By the way, lockdowns are going to cause more harm than good. I mean, all those things are true. All those things are true. But what we're essentially saying is the policies are wrong because they're not effective. And by implication, what we're saying is if the policies were effective, they would be okay. And instead, I think the argument should have been, doesn't matter if they work or not. We are free people. You can't do this under any circumstances. I will decide whether to take a vaccine or not.
Right.
I don't care if the vaccine works. I don't care if it's safe or not.
Right.
I don't care if it's been tested properly or not. Mind your own business. And so all the arguments about the efficacy of the measures,
it's just mudslinging at that
as
point.
They are, they're endorsing this way of governing.
Yeah, so you're just getting into their argument. You're just playing by their rules.
Playing their game. You're playing their game.
So you're suggesting also that there's a selection bias in terms of temperament or philosophy values. So you would actually have different people running the bureaucracy than, okay, that's really interesting. And that I've never thought about that before, but that's
it's one reason why we have such a huge administrative state. We have the nanny state. And it's this all seemed to be a sudden COVID thing, right? Because suddenly the state was running everything. They could tell you, whether you could open your business, whether you could walk across the park, whether you could have a job, whether you could do this and do that. I mean, they were running the show, and it seemed like overnight, but it's not overnight. This has been the trend for decades. It just sort of came to a head. And people have put the question this way, why was it that the government failed so badly during COVID? And one of the ways to answer that question is to say, it didn't fail. As far as the state is concerned, they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams.
That's what I would say. It seems like a crazy success for them.
Yeah. And that success has nothing to do with the outcomes on COVID. It has everything to do with the degree of control it managed
Power
to
grab.
impose.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And going back to your question about the governor, was it the governor or the mayor that you mentioned?
The governor, yeah.
Governor, right. So, that person is the head of the administrative state in his state. And so the success of the state in taking control of COVID is one of the ways that I don't know how his brain works. I don't know what he actually thinks, but that's a measure of success or failure. And so, it's not going to be in his interests probably to take the entity that he is in control of and roll it back, but rather the reverse. So even if the words coming out of his mouth don't seem to make a lot of sense, because there's an audience for them and because it serves the purpose of the institution that he runs, it in a different kind of way, it makes complete sense.
It does, but it's very Machiavellian and it's very
Oh yeah,
it's psychopathic. It seems like to manipulate these couple of variables and just act as if human society can be restructured along such simple little lines without regard for the obvious fallout that's going to occur, that's so predictable that it would harm people in numerous ways for a long time going forward,
right.
and hurt people beyond belief, hurt families
Yes,
and individuals
yes,
and livelihoods and the
yes,
economy and small businesses and just all the things that it was going to hurt. It just seemed
right.
so obvious from the outset that this was going to have these effects, and for these people to just unilaterally make these decisions for everybody uh, just seems like pure evil.
Yeah, I think you're reflecting the so if there's any silver lining, as I've been saying during COVID, it's the
Mm-hmm.
fact that for a lot of people, the curtain was pulled back
Mm-hmm.
on the way our governance systems actually work.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And there's an awful lot of goodwill amongst people in general
Mm-hmm.
about the faith they put in towards their governments and their officials and
Mm-hmm.
their school boards and all the people who are in charge of things.
Mm-hmm.
They believe that those people are acting in good faith and that the system makes a kind of sense and that there is justice in the world and the
Mm-hmm.
legal system works in a certain way. And we've discovered during COVID that that's actually not really true.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the greatest obstacles, I think, in this are is is people getting over their own belief. The greatest obstacle is our disbelief in seeing what has happened and
Mm-hmm.
understanding what it means, and requiring them to abandon their naivety, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
There's some people are naive about the idea that people are working, rowing all in the same direction for the common good. That's what they claim to be doing,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not really how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Common good is one of those things like beauty. It exists in the eye of the beholder, and you can define it any way you like if you have control.
Mm-hmm.
And every policy is working in the interest of somebody. You just have to figure out who it is. So it's a difficult, dark thing to accept, but I think it would be a good thing if people got up to speed about how things really worked.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything right now that gives you optimism that we're going to come through this in a positive way, or what would that even look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know. I don't know, but the good signs are that there are more and more people, well, having these kinds of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell by talking to people that even those people who are hiding,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them actually don't agree.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a question of whether or not there's going to be a a critical mass of people who affect the prevailing public opinion enough so that this just won't be acceptable anymore,
Mm-hmm.
or whether or not people will. So, for example, in my country,
Mm-hmm.
we've elected a federal government multiple times over
Mm-hmm.
that is totally on board with this kind of agenda,
Mm-hmm.
completely. I mean, that's what they are,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
it's not entirely certain whether or not they might win again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a reflection of the fact that this critical mass of people that I'm referring to just doesn't exist. There may not be a silent majority.
Mm-hmm.
It might be a silent proportion, but the proportion's not big enough to be a majority. And you probably don't even need a majority, but you need a
Mm-hmm.
big enough mass so that the thing becomes not acceptable anymore. I'm not sure that we're there. So on the hopeful side, I mean, there are a lot of us.
Mm-hmm.
Question is whether or not there are enough and
Mm-hmm.
enough of us with the with the daring to come out and say so out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And that reflects back on the strategies that we talked about. But and I don't know which of those is best. But bottom line for me is, for people who are in this conundrum and don't know what to do, first step is, for me, I would think, make a conscious decision to either be out or to hide. And then calculate your next steps accordingly, strategically. But if you decide to hide, don't just hide and forget about it. Like hide with purpose, so that you can, fight on the inside. And if you're going to come out and speak clearly, well, then do it and don't hide, and be willing to be called anything under the sun. But don't be in no man's land. Don't be sort of one thing or the other. That will cancel you and make you ineffective. You've got to be conscious about this.
So be intentional. Stop waffling. Either hide with intention or come on out.
Exactly.
Well, that's really good advice. And I think it's interesting to reframe things a little bit in terms of watching the thing implode on itself. I think that it sort of changes the picture from overturning something and using a lot of counter force to push back against something, to just being prepared to sweep up the mess after the thing tears itself apart.
Even if the strategy is to make it implode, there's still going to be a lot of picking up required afterwards.
Right.
And that itself requires preparation, requires preservation of certain things, so that, and we don't know how this is going to go, right? I mean, this thing might implode tomorrow.
Well, this is what I've thought about with the gender thing, for instance, is like the gender thing seems like I'm watching the arc of this play out, and we've got all these detransitioners coming out and all these really intelligent practitioners saying, why are we doing this with these kids? So I feel like we're going to, my prediction is that we're going to watch this go full circle, and there's going to be a backlash against the transition that's been happening in minors, at least.
Maybe.
Well, I hope. Yeah. And this is just my prediction. Maybe it's an overly optimistic one, but I feel like we're going to watch this happen over the next several years, maybe decade, maybe 5, I don't know. But even after that, even if I'm right and there's an optimistic, this turns around and we stop, we get a hold of ourselves culturally, we still have an entire generation of kids that has been impacted by this ideology to such an extent that this is going to scar this generation as they move forward. And its ripples are going to go on for some time, even if we come to a satisfying conclusion of this.
Sure.
Over the
but this is the bait and switch, right? So it's very possible that this particular thing will go as you're describing. Just like COVID itself is now fading away, right? The mandate rules and so on are gone mostly, and so but the lessons has not been learned. And the next campaign is sort of already being prepared. I don't know what's the next pandemic or climate change or whatever it is, but the precedent has been embraced.
Right.
And the transgender thing. So let's just play this out. So if we accept the proposition that the transgender thing is both a part of this larger idea and also connected to a transhumanist kind of agenda. So you take a generation of kids, you make them a portion of them sterile. They can't reproduce. So what does that mean for the future? Well, that means that the rate of reproduction goes down. That means requirement for more immigration, but perhaps in the transhumanist sense, more of an impetus to invent a way to reproduce in an unnatural way, like Brave New World, right? Brave New World because of the damage that we did to transgendered kids. But that's good because now we're taking nature into our own hands. And we have to do this, of course, because we need to reproduce, right? This serves the agenda. It's not contrary to it. A lot of this is about creating problems that they can then solve with the philosophies and the strategies that they are embracing all the way along.
Problem, reaction, solution.
Just because you win one doesn't mean you actually won. That win might actually be a loss.
So then what is the lesson, and what is the proper way to conceptualize these things if that's not it?
Uh, it is to always, if you're going to be one of these people who are out, who are
Mm-hmm.
transparent
Mm-hmm.
and sort of bold in your objection, then you have to attack the foundation. You can't
Okay.
you can't just attack this issue or that issue, because those are there for you to attack.
Yes, that's like you said, playing their game.
Playing their game. You
Mm.
have to attack the foundation of the whole program.
Okay.
And as I say, this might implode tomorrow, or on the other hand, it might rule for 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
Who's to know? But in the meantime, in what other choice do you have?
Mm-hmm.
If you're inclined not to want to hide, then you might as well get out there and say what you think and say what you know is true, because the alternative is terrible.
Mm-hmm. So how do you attack the transgender agenda? Transhumanism? How do you attack the foundation of that without getting into the nitty gritty?
Well, I'm not saying you stay away from the nitty gritty, but you relate the nitty gritty to the big ideas,
Okay.
right? I mean, one approach, like in COVID, is to
Mm-hmm.
attack transgenderism for its effects, and that's entirely valid. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
effects are terrible
Right.
upon the individuals that you're doing it to,
Right.
just like the effects of the COVID measures were terrible upon the individuals that suffered them.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to do the other one too, which is to say, regardless of whether or not it works out,
Mm-hmm.
still wrong. These are minors.
Mm-hmm.
They have no capacity to consent.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't allow them to get a tattoo
Mm-hmm.
at 9 years old,
Right.
because you can't reverse it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're allowing them to change their gender.
Right.
It doesn't matter if it works out for them or not.
Mm-hmm.
It is not something that you are allowed to do to them, period.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to go deeper than that, you can start having the faith fight, or the meaning fight, or the
Mm-hmm.
nature fight, which is, that girl is a girl.
Mm-hmm.
And you will not change her or try to change her into something else, because that is her God-given right to be who she is, and who she is has meaning. And sorry, it's out of bounds. We won't let you do it.
So if it's the school saying this, or medical professionals or somebody saying these things, or participating in these interventions on behalf of children, then it's easy to argue from a family's rights or a parent's rights standpoint. But if it's the parents doing it, then who enforces against the parents? That comes back to the state.
Good
And
question.
so do we use
Yeah.
state power to enforce this, or do we use the power of morals? And what do we use as our backdrop for this?
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Well, I mean, the law is in flux, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I wish there were dependable legal principles to allow us to use the state for these purposes, and sometimes it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the ideas, I mean, those ideal legal principles come from the same place as the other argument, which is, liberty, independence, individual autonomy, and so on. There are some. I mean, if you're fighting between the state and the parents, if the parents are saying no and the state's saying, the medical authorities and so on are saying yes, well then, of course, the parents should get their way, because they're the ones
the closest to the consequences,
closest to the person, and they are the ones who should be able to make the important decisions for the kid. But in the scenario that you're talking about, if you have a 9-year-old whose parents want to, change her into something else, well, okay, so that child, although they're not able to make decisions yet, is still an individual. And so there is going to be a certain point where even the parents, I mean, we do draw these lines. The parents are not allowed to take a child and lock them in the cellar,
right,
and not feed them and starve them to death. I mean, they're the parents. That's the kid. That's the relationship they have. It's the parents that decide first and foremost, but not without any limits, because you can't do that. You can't cross that line and physically abuse,
violate that
child,
person's
right?
rights.
I would put this in the same category. If you're cutting off pieces of the child, what's the difference between that and actual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
That is actual abuse,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's, legitimized by, medical authorities. One of the things we have to get over is the idea of deferring to authority.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a large ask for people who live in a civilization that's built upon authority.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we defer to all kinds of authorities,
Mm-hmm.
especially our own doctors. And our own doctors, for the most part, of course, differs from doctor to doctor, but a lot of our doctors approve of that system too. They like
Mm-hmm.
having authority. It's
Mm-hmm.
the source of their status and their income and their,
Mm-hmm.
expertise and such. We have to change that model. I mean, for my money, doctors and lawyers and psychologists and all the professions are supposed to be coaches and
Mm-hmm.
coaches only, who provide advice
Mm-hmm.
and suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
And then each of us supposed to make our own decision.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the way a lot of people want it, because that gives them too much responsibility to make decisions and think things through and to research stuff and to have their own idea about how things work.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't want it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what got us into this.
Mm-hmm.
If you're relying upon authorities to tell you what medicine to take for a problem, then you'll be more inclined to agree that your 9-year-old daughter maybe should be transitioned to a boy.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Mm-hmm.
They are not that kind of authority.
Mm-hmm.
And they especially are not a moral authority on anything. That is not their area of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
If nobody can prove that a moral view is the one right one, that means there are no moral authorities. And it's up to you to make your own call.
It comes back to the individual.
Yep.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to leave it, because I think that's so well expressed, and I agree. I really love how you said that, and I agree that we put too much weight on authority, and then that there is an untangling and almost a deinstitutionalization of the mind that needs to happen in order to come through this.
That's a great way to put it. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Is there any? Do you have any recommendations or links that you'd like to provide, or places where people can follow the work that you've been doing?
Sure, I'd love to. Yes. So I'm working with the think tank. We call it Rights Probe, and our website is rightsprobe.org. And most of the work that I'm doing there is posted in that location. So thank you for asking.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Bruce. I've really enjoyed speaking with you, and I'm grateful that you took the time to have this conversation.
Oh, thank you, Leslie. It was a real pleasure. Cheers.
Thanks.